You're listening to The Abundance Agenda, a podcast about growth and progress. I'm James O'Malley.
And against my better judgment, I'm still Martin Robbins.
This week, we're not building anything in Peckham, but first, is it your party or my party?
James, a great philosopher once said that there ain't no party like an S-Club party. But it turns out that might not be true. Apparently, there's an even greater party in town, and we're going to show you how. James, we've been told by our producers that we need to be more appealing to a younger demographic. How am I doing?
Martin, I'm going to have to break this to you. I'm sure these references now, they must be about 25, maybe 30 years old at this point.
That seems very unlikely, James. But anyway, it's a year that ends with a number, and that means that there's a new left-wing political party on the scene.
Finally.
Yep, it's what we've all been waiting for. And this one's actually a bit of a blast from the past, much like S Club 7, apparently. A grizzled old veteran, James, coming out of retirement for one last shot at redemption. I assume you know who I'm talking about.
What was his name? It's not Jeremy Corbyn, is it?
It's the great JC risen again. So we're not a horse race podcast, so I'll spare our listeners all of the boring details, but just to provide a bit of context, basically, as far as I can tell, Corbyn wanted possibly to start a new party. He kind of got beaten to the post by Zara Sultana, who just quit Labour in the last months and tried to launch it herself at the beginning of July. Left everyone very confused. They've now all come together and relaunched it with a speech, and apparently they're going to be co-leaders going forwards. It's not massively clear. I know Owen Jones is a big fan, and he signed up as a sort of angry Tintin figure. And there's a website which is called Your Party, but apparently it's not actually called that yet. They're going to decide a name for it in September. So hopefully that's all clear for our listeners.
Yeah, like Martin says, we're not a biased podcast, so all of my sort of PTSD flashbacks to 2015 to 2020, that's all entirely impartial PTSD. But Martin, this is all very interesting, and if people haven't looked into it, do have a Google around on the founding of your party. It's very, very funny. But we're an abundance podcast, so what does this have to do with abundance?
So your party...
Not my party, Martin.
No. I mean, your party. I mean, it's not even actually called that, but whatever the party is called, its stated aim is to be a populist left-wing party, which places it basically next to reform on the political horseshoe, the sort of other heel, if you like. And here's a fun fact, James. Apparently, people think the heel is the round bit at the bottom of the horseshoe, but actually, there's two heels on a horseshoe, and they're at the top. Who knew? But anyway.
Sorry, let's focus on that. That's blowing my mind now, Martin. You're right. That's exactly because that's like a foot. That's how it works.
Exactly.
Of course, that makes sense.
Yeah, I know, and it blew my mind when I saw it. But anyway, I've gone very, very slightly off track. So we talk a lot on this podcast about how populism has risen, partly due to, I would say, a lack of abundance-based thinking. And this is kind of an interesting new manifestation of it. So it's interesting to dig into what do they think and what would their policies actually mean in terms of abundance.
So sadly, I guess we know a lot about what right-wing populism looks like, Martin, but what does left-wing populism look like in this case, I guess?
So I guess the kind of trite analysis would be if you take most of reforms literature and you replace immigrants with billionaires, that's pretty much what you end up with. So it's not to completely dismiss the downsides of rogue billionaires and crazy spacemen and bad corporations, but it sort of takes it into this world where if you could only tax the rich enough and nationalize everything and stop doing wars, somehow that solves all of the massive systemic problems that the country faces.
Right. I know you're the purest form of centrist, Martin, but I'm not going to be the one, doing that. Oh, why can't we be more sympathetic to to billionaires? I'm not going to give my £3 a month to a billionaire's charity so we can try and make them feel better. But anyway, so basically, it's a lot of conspiratorial thinking, I guess. The government are seen as these evil villains who are either in the pockets of billionaires or they're, trying to erase white British culture or something. Whatever flavour you pick, it's something like that.
Yeah, exactly. So I would say both of these movements are fundamentally paranoid, by which I mean they embody that sort of conspiracy-minded approach to politics that Richard Hofstadter famously set out in his essay, The Paranoid Style in American Politics, which, if any listeners haven't read it, really it's worth reading. It's an incredible encapsulation of a lot of the trends and approaches that we see in politics in 2025. And you can get a flavor of it from this McCarthy quote that Hofstadter referenced in his essay.
So this is Joseph McCarthy, the American politician who didn't like the communists and created the Red Scare.
Exactly. And he said, "How can we account for our present situation unless we believe that men high in this government are concerting to deliver us to disaster? This must be the product of a great conspiracy on a scale so immense as to dwarf any previous such venture in the history of man."
Have you no decency, Martin?
Thank you. Some topical 1950s humor for our listeners there.
Yeah.
But anyway, the first line of the launch statement of this party that's not called Your Party, and as we've established is not literally your party, is "The system is rigged," which kind of gives you some sense of the vibe here, right?
So do we know anything about what this new party's policies are? Have they got that far yet? Have they had the big Nando's summit where they decide what they stand for? How are they going to unrig the system?
Well, I think the Nando's Summit, as you call it, is going to be a conference in September. There's only a short statement to go on so far, but it's the usual kind of hard left stuff. So massive redistribution of wealth, tax the rich, nationalize everything you can get your hands on so that the Tories or Reform can run them all in the future. But a couple of things stand out from an abundance perspective that are quite interesting. One is a massive program of council house building, and the other is a commitment to stand up to what they call the fossil fuel giants and presumably move us more towards renewables.
Oh, I think I've got a horrible feeling about where this is going, Martin.
Well, okay. So, firstly, like on the housing side, I think it's fascinating where we've got to on housing, and it really does start to show how populism is emerging as a response to government's failure to ensure abundance. So, I think what's interesting, if you look at both of these movements, Reform are very, very big on planning reform to get more houses built, which is great stuff if you ignore all the bits about foreigners. But anyway,
I'll believe Nigel Farage will build houses when I actually see them being built. I just can't comprehend anyone who ever crosses the box for reform ever thinking, yeah, I'm fine with building.
well, I think their plan is to seize Normandy and do it there or something. But your party, Corbyn and Sultana's party, Cortana, I guess we could call it after the Halo AI. But anyway, they want to start a massive council house building program, which also I think is great. But details are pretty scarce so far. But it's interesting that all of the sort of populist movements now are consolidating on we definitely need to build more houses.
Does that make us accidental populists, Martin? Us in our sort of technocratic, out of touch ways. Anyway, but who's going to build the most houses then? Who should I vote for?
Well, crucially, there are no numbers yet. Obviously, on the reform side, they just talk about planning reform, so there's no number there. Corbyn, previously, Labour's manifesto under Corbyn in 2019 talked about 100,000 council houses per year, which sounds great, but realistically, you compare that to Labour's pledge for 1.5 million under Starmer. If they want the abundance vote there, I think they're going to need to get a bit more ambitious than 100,000 a year.
And you'll have to excuse me if I am being a bit skeptical because, even if they are committed on paper to building, I guess a bit like reform, I just can't see in practice these sorts of hard left figures supporting building because you'll get the exact same people kicking off about, gentrification, evil developers and so on. We'll talk more about that in a bit, but that's the sort of general tone you get from this part of the political spectrum.
Yes, exactly. So there's a big question, I guess, about given your set of beliefs, how are you actually going to achieve this objective? And this also comes up because they are big fans of renewable energy, James.
Really?
So genuinely, both leaders, co-leaders,
Hmm.
whatever they are, founders, somethings, are big fans of wind power. And I'm not just going to make a joke about blowing lots of hot air, James. Corbyn's views on solar are actually a bit harder to pin down, but certainly both of them oppose the ban on onshore wind. In fact, Corbyn, back in 2019, had an incredibly ambitious commitment in the manifesto to invest £87 billion in order to increase wind power production 5 times with new wind farms basically all the way up and down the North Sea, just spamming the wind farm button, which is pretty enthusiastic stuff.
Well, that sounds quite good.
Yeah, it does. But the problem starts when you realize that when Corbyn and Labour made that pledge in 2019, wind was actually providing about 21% of our electricity usage at that point. Today, it's up to 30%. But obviously, if you took 21% and increased that by five, that would be like over 100% of Britain's energy coming from wind. And the problem with that is that wind is obviously a volatile supply. It changes hour by hour. So you need some way to balance that supply, either by building vast farms of batteries or providing an alternative zero carbon energy source, which obviously the most likely candidate would have to be nuclear. So it's great, I guess, to build all of those wind farms, if rather expensive. But we could sell the excess to Europe and get some money back from the electricity that way. But it doesn't actually then solve the energy problem. You've got to build something alongside it.
Why can't we just have it so when you type a query into ChatGPT, it checks the whether the wind is blowing or not, and then as a thinking says, come back later when the wind is blowing to find out the answer. But anyway, so you mentioned nuclear there, and we all know Corbyn's position on nuclear bombs. He's not a big fan, to say the least. So does he like nuclear power stations, do we know?
Yeah, in recent years, it's actually quite hard to fathom. It's surprisingly difficult to pin down Corbyn on a lot of different issues. So you find this with solar power, you find it with nuclear power. He's one of those people that everyone kind of says, oh, he talks so clearly and straightforwardly. But actually, I kind of find he just mumbles about topics and often refuses to give a straight answer.
Yeah, I call this the sort of Rowan Williams syndrome. And this goes back to my sort of days as a radical, angry atheist on the internet. When you've got like a softly spoken, beardy man who everyone thinks is a sort of important, august moral figure. When you actually try to pin him down, Rowan Williams in this case, and ask him anything mildly spicy, like whether he thought the miracles in the Bible did literally happen, whether there was literally 5,000 loaves magically replicated, instead of giving a clear answer, because, it's sort of awkward to admit he really thinks that thing happened, he'll sort of just waffle and say things that sound clever and important, but will never actually give you a straight answer. And that reminds me of a lot of what Jeremy Corbyn says about things when he just goes, oh, why can't we just be nice?
Yeah, I love, by the way, how we're turning this into a early 2000s nostalgia episode. But
You were listening to S Club. I was there getting furious on the internet about creationists.
yeah, they were very different experiences. But so Corbyn on nuclear, historically, he was very much against it. And that actually, I think, caused some interesting tensions in the Labour Party in the Corbyn years that were, not really talked about much, because obviously there were some pretty major tensions that maybe took a front seat. But yeah, there was this sort of weird moment in 2017 at the election there where he kind of converted and wrote a letter in support of a new reactor that was being built near Sellafield. Basically, it seems because they were worried that they were going to potentially lose a seat there. So there's this sort of uneasy agreement, I guess, that he came to within the Labour Party. And that kind of ambivalence reflected a wider debate in the Labour Party at that time. Now, obviously, a faction of that has moved in to set up this new party, and it will be really interesting to see where do they go with that. Does he go back to his roots because he's free from the constraints of the Labour Party? Or do they go more along the lines of the green industrial revolution rhetoric that people like Zara Sultana have pitched to voters over the last few years? Like, maybe they could be pro-nuclear as well.
Yeah, the one thing I will say for the far left or the further left is they do have those people like Aaron Bastani is the author of Fully Automated Luxury Communism. I've not read it, but Ezra Klein, the Pope of Abundance, he cites this book in glowing terms in the start of the book Abundance, which surprised me. He said there is that sort of thinking on the hard left. So it's not that hard to imagine, I guess. So maybe there is an optimistic vision for this new party supporting abundance and green industry and so on. So I guess next you'll be telling me, maybe they're HS2 fans as well.
Oh, well beyond HS2, James. Corbyn wants to build HS3.
HS3, Martin.
I know. So in incredible scenes back in 2018, he actually travelled the route of a proposed crossrail for the North, like a kind of old man pilgrimage. Essentially, it was going to be running from Liverpool Lime Street via Manchester and Leeds to Hull. Today, it's been kind of subsumed into the idea of the Northern Powerhouse Rail Scheme, which I actually think is a much less catchy name for it. But that's why I'm not in charge of naming things. And it's kind of been in the doldrums since it was curtailed under the Tories. But given his apparent love of trains, so there's a pretty good chance they could try and revive the route again and make HS3 a reality. Wouldn't that be amazing?
So here's my thinking, Martin. Portillo and Corbyn crossover.
Yeah, I mean that's the ultimate like TV travel series, isn't it? They get on the Trans-Siberian Express and share their differing experiences of Russia, Mongolia, and China. And Corbyn can talk to Portillo about communism along the way. It's a match made in heaven.
So, Martin, what you're telling me is that even if your party,
It's not my party, James. Let's be clear about this.
even if they become wildly successful and become a big deal and, take power, they seize control of the means of production, it might not be completely terrible.
Oh no, it will definitely be terrible, James, because they're populists, and that's the problem. Here's another quote. We have a housing crisis. Our young people struggle to get on the property ladder. Energy bills are some of the highest in Europe. That's from a party that's going to do planning reform. They're going to fast track small modular reactors. They're going to invest in lithium battery production, and they'll nationalize our utilities to bring them into public ownership. Does that sound like a good party?
I mean, I'm guessing it's not American because you didn't do an accent, but it does sound like a good platform. Yeah, that sounds like all pretty good ideas.
Congratulations, James. You're now a reform voter.
What?
I think that this is the problem, right? And I think it's what's fascinating about these parties, kind of all joking aside. In both cases, they have clearly understood the brief. They are parties that can talk quite convincingly about the symptoms of British malaise. They're connecting with people. You can see some of the amazing technological and economic opportunities for the future. But the moment you scratch the surface and you try and get into how are you actually going to achieve that, there's no real analysis or thinking by it. So how is Corbyn going to pay for £87 billion for wind farms, right? Who are Reform going to have building these houses if they've thrown all the foreign workers out of the country? Why would you invest as a business in small modular reactors under Reform when they're also going to start fracking and coal mining again and exploiting the North Sea? Like these things economically just don't match up to each other. If you're looking at the wind farms, for example, Corbyn's proposal is that private companies will come in and provide tens of billions of pounds in financing for energy projects. But how is that going to happen when you've nationalised them and when you've put punitive taxes on capitalists? So there's just a total lack of systems thinking. It's basically all, yeah, this one small trick can save Britain, and the world just isn't that simple.
Except for building more housing, Martin. If we do that, it does actually solve everything.
Yeah, that is true. Just building more housing would fix a shitload of stuff.
So what I'm hearing, Martin, I guess, is that it may still be true that there ain't no party like an S Club party.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was rammed home last week when we learned that one of the members of S Club 7 apparently trashed his home with a hammer while off his face on crystal meth, which, if I'm honest, is a level of vigor and excitement that I wouldn't really expect from Corbyn these days. I think his firebrand era is very much behind him. But speaking of addictive things that trigger rage, James, listeners should immediately subscribe to our podcast. And this week, we'll be giving our 100th subscriber a free solar panel, which James will be extracting from an old Casio calculator and sending over to you in the post. Also, don't just follow us on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you're using. You can also go to abundancepod.com. We have a Substack there. You can find the show notes, listen to the episodes a second time because they're that damn good. Find links to our other writing to enrage you even further, and leave comments that we may or may not ignore depending on how nice they are. And don't forget also to like us and to share with your friends and leave a 5-star review. Everything helps.
And yet we've been piling on the listeners over the last few weeks, so do recommend go back and look at the archives. We've got some good stuff in there. I particularly recommend our episode where we talked about Sadiq Khan turning heel on the green belt and deciding to build on it, where we had guests Andrew Hunter Murray, and perhaps the most important episode to Abundance Agenda Canon, which was Martin's incredible reporting from Dobbins Lane in Wendover. I won't spoil what that is. Go to abundancepod.com, listen to our previous episodes. So, Martin, what do you think when you think of Peckham?
So this is the London suburb that saw the white heat of economic growth in the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher, spearheaded by businesses like Trotter's Independent Traders, although apparently they got cancelled after it came out that Del Boy was paying no income tax or VAT.
Sorry, Martin, you've got to leave the pony in your pocket and the suitcase in the van. Only Fools and Horses was not actually shot in Peckham. It was mostly shot in Bristol.
All TV is a lie. God damn it.
All TV is a lie, but that's okay because there is a lot more we can talk about what's going on in Peckham.
Yeah, so I just Googled Peckham News, and the first headline that came up was Teenager Shoots Man in Front of Own Mother, which, if I'm honest, it sounds like a far cry from rural Bedfordshire.
It's not quite that bad, I don't think, Martin. I'm old enough to remember Peckham when it was a bit rough. When I first moved to London in 2008, I went to a party in a squat there, if you can believe
How
that.
amazing. We're learning about your radical youth here. Was it better or worse than an S-Club party?
It's sort of hard to tell. I don't think I've ever been quite as cool as that since, so I don't really know how to judge it. But from what I can remember, it was around the time of the 2008 American election. Attila the Stockbroker, the old punk poet, turned up and did some poems, and then we all went outside and burned some effigies of George Bush and Tony Blair.
And yet now you're a fan of the Tony Blair Institute, and I hear it itching for another war in Iraq.
Probably more the former than the latter, Martin, but it really makes me feel old. It was a really different time thinking back now. That's a proper retro memory at this point. And I know in the intervening 20 years or whatever, I've gone from raging against the machine to thinking the machine's think tank actually has some pretty good ideas. But anyway, Peckham as well has changed. It's gone from being sort of quite a scary place, and shootings aside, it's gone to being arguably the hipster capital of London now that Shoreditch has sold out to the man and has gone too corporate.
I'll take your word for it. But is this segment actually getting to any point, James?
Yes, so this is a very long run up because there was some very annoying news from Peckham this week. So basically, for a while now, there's been a big plan to do a complete redevelopment of the Aylsham Centre, which is basically a pretty dowdy shopping centre. It's 5 minutes walk from Peckham Rye Station, the main train station in Peckham. And for context, this is a really well connected train station. It's served by, I was trying to count it up, it's something like 24 trains an hour or something. I was looking at 10 a.m. on a Tuesday or something like that. You can get to London Bridge, you can get to Victoria, you can get to St Pancras. It's on the Windrush line, which is obviously part of the overground and can take you basically orbital around London. And yet 5 minutes away is this shopping centre, which is just massively out of date. And I'm guessing it's not doing great business because it's a shopping centre in 2025 and nobody's doing well. And there's also just a big Morrison's there and a massive car park.
So I think I can see where this is going. It seems pretty ripe as an opportunity.
Yeah, so it's all pretty obvious, isn't it? They're going to redevelop the shopping centre for the Morrisons, keep all the shops, but build a whole ton of flats on top, up to, I think the original proposal was for 877 new flats, and it would have been really close to a train station. And I think it would have been a really great idea for sort of increasing the housing supply. It's the platonic ideal of transit-oriented development. And, I'm a fan of tall buildings, and this would have led to buildings which are you ready for this, Martin?
Yeah, let me brace myself for your thrusting concrete pillar.
Oh, Jesus. Yes, Martin, they would have been 20 stories tall in a major city. Imagine that, 20 stories.
That's twice the height of Nelson Mandela House, which I guess you're going to tell me is not actually called that and isn't in London.
No, that's apparently Whitemead House in Bristol. Anyway, in principle, I think this development was all broadly a good idea. So guess what Southwark Council Planning Committee decided to do last week?
I think I can probably guess here, James, but go on.
That's right, they voted to reject the plan.
So why did they do that then? What was the galaxy brain reasoning behind this?
So the crux of the dispute comes down to a row over affordable housing. So basically, when a big development like this happens, the council and the developers will negotiate over what percentage of homes have to be classed as affordable. So that's things like council housing at a social rent or other types of subsidised housing, so like shared ownership, things like that. The idea is to make housing more affordable to people. And the original plan had it set at 35% of the new units being created would be affordable. But then last December, the developers reduced the overall plan to, I think it was 867 units overall. And then crucially, they cut the affordable percentage to just 12%. So that's just 77 affordable units. That's 50 socially rented and 27 sort of intermediate shared ownership things, as I say. And that's the change that I guess persuaded the council to say no.
So let me channel my inner left-wing populist. Was it all the greedy capitalist pigs, James, or is there more to it?
Well, so this is where it gets really interesting. And I think obviously it's right to be very skeptical of what big developers say. You know, we're not total shills for the man here. But what Berkeley Homes, the developers, say is that they basically cite a whole bunch of similar problems to those raised by Tom Copley, the Deputy Mayor of London for Housing, who we spoke to on last week's show. He spoke about the difficulty of building in London. So, for example, since these plans were first put together in 2021, material and labour costs have risen because of supply and demand reasons, because of inflation and so on. We've got the new post-Grenfell regulations coming in. So this is things like having an extra stairway and extra design requirements, which basically adds complexity to designs and leaves less space for flats if you've got to build like an extra staircase going up. And it's all sort of piled on the costs. And then, you know, you've got the general macroeconomic picture of higher interest rates because of Ukraine and Liz Truss. And then there was also a grant that the Greater London Authority was going to chip in, but that was lost as well.
So, this is the kind of situation where naively I would expect that the council and the developers can all come together like responsible adults and say, look, this is what we're dealing with, this is the situation. How do we come to a consensus, sort it out, and move forward?
Yeah, this is what surprised me. It seems to have got really quite contentious. So the council were clearly not sympathetic to the developers here, and that's why they rejected the plan. They said that the borough policy and the London plan, that's a big spatial plan set out by the Mayor of London for how London should develop, that suggests that a minimum of 35% of homes in developments like this should be affordable. And, you know, this sentiment was shared by the local MP, Miata Fambula, who's actually the energy minister. We should get her on the show at some point to talk about energy. But anyway, she posted slightly disappointingly, I must say. I support building on the Aylsham site, but they must include the right amount of social and affordable housing. With 18,000 on Southwark's housing waiting list and thousands of kids in temporary accommodation, Barclay's 12% offer simply isn't good enough. And I saw this and I think it's driving me a bit mad because it sort of illustrates so many of the tensions that we talk about on this show almost every week.
Yeah, essentially it's like letting the perfect be the enemy of the good again. We're going to delay this thing for a number of years. Maybe we'll somehow get something different in the 2030s, but you just sort of don't feel like there's any urgency that we need the houses. Let's figure out a way to get them built quickly.
Yeah, nobody seems to take time into account. And I am going to be much more petty here for a moment because obviously there's these sort of broader economic reasons that you could look into as to why this has been turned down. But also there was this sort of NIMBY-ish reaction. Unsurprisingly, there's local residents there who formed a group to campaign against it. They accused it of gentrification and basically hit, you know, every item on the NIMBY bingo card in terms of saying we support building, but we need the right sort of homes. And they talk about, you know, the historic low-rise nature of Peckham, like that's some sacred thing, which I don't quite
Which is
understand.
hilarious because the thing that Peckham is most famous for is a tower block in Bristol.
Yeah, and talking about the hard left as we did earlier, there's this amazing article from 2024 on the Zara media website titled "Nobody in Peckham Wants More Luxury Flats." So I guess there's another reason to be sceptical that the new Corbyn-led party, the Your Party, will actually build any housing that it says it wants.
Yeah, that's a pretty strong line from a site that's run by the person who did fully automated luxury communism. But yeah, moving on.
Anyway, at risk of being sort of a massive neoliberal shill about this, I think this is a sort of perfect example of how people seem to forget that supply and demand still apply when it comes to housing. You know, because the reason we have this category of affordable homes in the first place is because housing is really expensive. And one way to make it less expensive is to build more of it. And it's not like there's a separate market. Someone pointed this out on Twitter this week, forgive me, I can't remember who. But there's obviously not a separate market of affordable and market rate housing. People only live in one place. So if you have more private units, that's good because you get the effect of people moving up into the empty units when people move to new units. So even if quote unquote luxury housing is built, it frees up less quote unquote luxury housing for other people to move into.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the things that really bugs me about discussion of affordable housing generally, because when you say that phrase, it conjures up images of cheap housing, but that's not really what it means. It's housing that's perhaps 20% below market rates in some cases. And the reality is, house prices can go up by that in a few years if you don't get enough of them built. So it's not really solving the problem long term. It's a bit of a sticking plaster where the ultimate solution is build more housing quickly.
Absolutely. And I do sort of get why you may want to achieve other objectives with housing. Maybe you could accuse us of obsessing too much on the sort of headline figures of the number of houses. Like maybe you don't want to permanently displace existing low income communities when building new flats. There was a big controversy about a decade ago now when the Haygate estate near Elephant and Castle, also in South London, was redeveloped. They added a whole ton of private flats there and ended up with something like 74 socially rented flats out of 2,500. But here's what's driving me a bit mad, right? In the Haygates case, that was taking flats that people already lived in, knocking them down and building new flats on top and many more flats on top. But the Aylsham Centre is currently home to, let me just check, um, 0 people. 0 people live there, Martin, because it's shops and a car park. There is no one being displaced. This is literally just a sort of a freebie, 5 minutes walk away from a major train station, which would have added 800 new homes to the housing supply.
Well, you say that, James, but there are all those American YouTubers that live in camper vans and tour Europe. They love a good urban car park. They turn up there and they use the bins for all their rubbish. They start popping into the local restaurants with a GoPro and using the toilet. They'd love a place like that. So maybe don't be too hasty.
I would see a video of them walking around Peckham Morrison's going, oh, what are these crazy British snacks like chocolate digestives? But anyway, the sum total of turning this down is that the housing supply won't be increased after all. There will be no extra homes, either private, social, or rented or anything like that. And according to Southwark Council, Peckham has 4,000 households that are currently on the social housing waiting list. And obviously, this wouldn't have solved all those problems, but that number will still be 4,000 because nothing will actually be built and the plans have been put on pause. And once again, time has been this factor that nobody is really taking into account. And that's where there is some potential good news because it's not the end of the road for this development. The developers are now appealing to the planning inspectorate. So hopefully, Angela Rayner will bring down the approval stamp to get things being built. But again, that won't be till October. So that's another 4 months of basically pissing about when nothing is happening, where there won't be homes being built for people to live in. And so the housing supply in Peckham will remain exactly as it is.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that annoys me most about the current planning system. It's not even that things get blocked, it's that they can still go ahead, but they just get delayed for months or a year and cost more money in the end. So it's a bad outcome for literally everybody involved. It is an utterly pointless waste of time.
Yeah, so obviously this is really annoying, and I hope that eventually the Aylsham Centre does get redeveloped because, again, brilliant place to put housing. But I have a twist, Martin, and this will be good news to one of our listeners who posted a comment saying last week's show was a bit miserable. We both had two grumpy segments. So there is another part of London where there is actually a lot of development going on, and it's quite an exciting one, I think.
So Camden's getting a tram network, is that it?
God, no, I wish. I think that's Ken Livingstone's other good idea that was never fully realised, the Cross River Tram. One day we will get a Cross River Tram. But no, this was a redevelopment in Edgware. This is a train station right at the top end of the Northern Line in North London. It's quite a sort of suburban area. But this week, the council signed off on basically an enormous redevelopment all around the train station. It's basically at the moment, like actually very similar to Peckham, it's basically a shopping centre and a supermarket and a car park, though the supermarket there is a Sainsbury's because the sorts of people living in Edgware wouldn't be seen dead in a Morrison's.
I mean, personally, I'm a Waitrose man, so they're all plebs to me. But tell me more about this enormous development, James.
Yeah, so the plan is to go, I guess, even more hardcore, Yimby, because the towers there, and this has all been approved, are going to be up to 29 stories tall, and it's going to create 3,365 new homes, all on top of this newly rebuilt shopping centre and bus station. There's a whole interesting transport sidebar here about how they're building a bus station underground, which wouldn't have been possible before because of petrol, but now they can because of electric buses. But yeah, and just to show off, they're creating a nature park as part of the development as well. And the amazing thing is, Edgware even got more objections. There are apparently 5,500 people objecting to the plans in Edgware compared to just 2,427 in Peckham.
So it sounds fantastic, James, but what about the affordable housing element? Have they got the same problems there?
So somehow they've managed to avoid all that. So this development has managed to stay at 35% affordable. So I'm guessing that's what eased the development through. But it does get a bit complicated because whenever there's a big development like this, it's always some sort of bespoke deal. It's not like a one size fits all thing. And I do slightly wonder if having this sort of 35% number set in stone can make things more difficult, because when you're trying to assemble financing for a big project like this, obviously in some cases you can need greater flexibility. Interestingly, in this case, because this was built actually around the train station, this was actually TfL land, Transport for London land. It was actually being built on. So TfL, they've got an actual stake in the project. They'll get some actual cash from when it's all being developed. So it'll be good for funding transport as well. And I'm guessing that maybe TfL insisted on the 35% for political reasons, because obviously TfL is ultimately controlled by the Mayor of London, who cares about things like affordable housing. So I guess unlike Peckham, and instead of it seeing a bit like a sort of a shakedown from the council to developers saying, "Come on, give us, give us some more," because TfL are actually have a stake in the project, I guess that helped get it through, which is quite nice. But yeah, the other interesting thing though is, as far as I can tell, one of the reasons that this development basically worked is because it's much bigger. There's going to be more commercial and retail leisure development around the area as well. You can see all these sort of very pretty renders of what the developers are imagining, and they've got like, a cinema. It's not like a trashy cinema, it's like a proper classy picture house or art house type cinema. And
It's
so
a hipster cinema.
it's
That's what it
it's
is,
a
James.
hipster cinema. So all this commercial stuff will be more of a sort of cross subsidy. So I guess the developers in Edgware's case decided they could take the hit on the affordable housing. And so if this is the case, I guess the big irony is that maybe the Peckham redevelopment would be more likely to go ahead if the towers had been even taller, because that would change the economics in the first place.
Yeah, and then Peckham too could have streams of men in flat caps and beards going into a picture house cinema to see Amelie. But I think this is a topic.
I think they've already got some of them, Martin.
Yeah. I think this is a topic we'll come back to in the context of stories like the new city being proposed at Thamesford up the road from me, right? So massive developments with thousands of houses have got a lot of advantages if you've got the right kind of political and economic vehicles to make them happen. You get better facilities, more doctors and schools and things. The economics of it are more robust. You can have a greater diversity of construction within that site. And I think this is where you can see a role for government or for public bodies like TfL or Great British Rail in the future in providing that kind of stable foundational partner that can reduce risk for developers and get things moving.
So I guess the lesson here is transit-oriented development, yes please, but build big so we can go big, and because we'll have the housing, go home. So, Martin, before we get on with this week's guest, let's do the usual housekeeping segment. So, yeah, if you're enjoying this week's show, grab your phone right now, go to your podcast app, give us 5 stars, and then get the link to the pod and send it to a friend. Go and post it on social media right now. Send it to someone on WhatsApp saying, hey, you're a nerd who likes building things. Maybe you'll like this podcast as well.
We really do mean do it right now. Like, I'm not joking immediately. Like, pick up your phone, press that button.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how people listen to us, whether you're on the bus, grab your phone. If you're helping a cow give birth, just get your hand out there and grab the phone and share the pod.
Grab the phone of the person next to you and, make sure that they're also subscribed to the pod. If you're on the bus and there's some guy dribbling on your shoulder, like his phone's unguarded, get that damn phone. Get that subscription. We need subscriptions. More subscriptions.
But we're not desperate. We're definitely not desperate.
No. We're doing very well on the subscriptions front, but, we're all about abundance, so the more the merrier.
And we've got enormous ego, so you need to feed that. But, Martin, that's enough calls to action for helping the pod. Let's help ourselves individually. So we both write Substack newsletters in addition to doing this podcast. Martin, what have you been writing about this week?
So, James, I've been writing about Waspinomics, which is about a plague of annoying creatures who want to ruin our lives. And, James, what have you been writing about?
I can't wait to read that, Martin. You're going to be a very unpopular man by the end of the week. So my most recent piece is about the planning bill and the amendments that have been proposed in the House of Lords and why they're bad and why they could have a sort of counteracting effect on the planning bill, which obviously we want to work and we want to actually lead to things being built. And I'm also working on something that's going to come out later this week, all about new towns, but I'm going to keep that under wraps for now.
Ooh, and we will at some point go and visit Thamesford. I think we might do our first ever walking the ground episode, to borrow Al Murray's phrase, and go and have a look.
I'm looking forward to it already, Martin. But anyway, let's get on with this week's guest because we've got a very big get this week. We've got Lord Philip Hunt, who until about a month ago was actually a minister in the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero and was the man responsible for basically Britain's nuclear policy. And it's a big week to talk to him because it was just a few days ago that, partially thanks to his work, that Sizewell C, the new nuclear power plant in Suffolk, it got its final sort of funding decision, 38 billion quid on the table, or I'm guessing in legal documents in principle, have been put there. So it does seem that Sizewell C is finally going to be built. So yeah, we thought let's have a chat with Lord Hunt and find out what's the big deal and how Britain can build more nuclear even faster. I'm delighted to be joined now by Lord Philip Hunt. Until recently, you were the actual nuclear minister. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. So we're talking to you, I think, just a few weeks after you've retired from government. And I guess in a delightful coincidence, I think it was yesterday, in fact, that Sizewell C finally got its £38 billion of funding secured. So, I mean, I'm guessing you must be pretty pleased.
I'm very chuffed, actually, because I see nuclear as being a very important part of our electricity generating power in the future. It's low carbon, it's safe, it's homegrown, so there's a lot going for it. It is expensive up front, and I spent quite a lot of my time in discussions across government with the Treasury, Downing Street, about the importance of this, and I'm delighted that it's over the line now. I should say I reached the age of 76 in May, and my wife decided that time was up. That's why I retired. So it wasn't a disagreement over government policy. It was simply that time caught up with me.
Must be a nice thing to happen to a political career, to end in a nice retirement rather than, a reshuffle or something like that.
Indeed so, because it's usually the electorate or the prime minister who chops you off. And, I have been subject to previous choppings off. So you're right. Yeah.
Oh, crikey.
But my time, nearly a year, it was very exciting, actually, because the decision to go back to new nuclear was made by the government in 2007. Oh, it's taken an awful long time from there to get holes in the ground and new nuclear power stations being built. Hinkley Point C in the southwest is a few years off going into full production. And it's mega. It's 3.2 gigawatts. That will give electricity to 6 million homes. Sizewell C is a replica of Hinkley Point C. So that's another 6 million homes. So over the next few years, nuclear will assume real importance in our electricity generating infrastructure.
So, like you say, you were in the job most recently for almost a year since last July when Labour came into power. Could you give me a flavour of what it was like behind the scenes in shepherding Hinkley along and getting Sizewell C to the point that it's now at? I take it was a lot of work to get there.
It was a lot of work, and we had a great team of officials at the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero working away at the finances, because Sizewell C is going to be funded both by government but also by the private sector. And it's very complex, and people in the Treasury have to be convinced of value for money. We have to make it attractive for private investors to come in. But they've got a great management team at Sizewell C as well. And one of the great things they're doing is investing a lot into the community, into further education, because it's going to give great employment to many people in East Anglia. Look, almost the first thing I did when I was appointed was go and visit Hinkley Point C in the southwest. And I have to say, it was a wow factor. I've never seen so many cranes all working at once. And the complexities of building nuclear power station, they are enormous. And obviously, safety is critical. And just putting it all together is a massive task. And they've had their ups and downs. They've had lots of delays, funding overruns, all sorts of things, really, as we learn more about developing new nuclear power stations. But the people doing it, I mean, I'm really confident now that by the early 2030s, it will really be up and running. We'll be very proud of it. And because we've learned a lot from the way Hinkley Point C has been built, all of this will help make sure that Sizewell C is delivered on time and on budget. And the management team at Sizewell, many of them already worked at Hinkley Point C, so they've got the experience. they're in constant communication with the people at Hinkley as well to make sure that we learn lessons as we go along.
I was going to save the tough questions for later, but I'm going to ask now. So, are you fully expecting that Sizewell C won't be as challenging as Hinkley in terms of? I think Hinkley
Listen,
was.
it will have its challenges. I'd
Yeah.
be very foolish to sit here and tell you there aren't going to be issues, but the fact that it's an 80% above ground replication of what's happened at Hinkley, and it's more modular. The approach is now taken is a lot of the units can be factory built and then brought on site, and you can make a lot of productivity gains as a result of it. And nuclear engineers, they're very smart people, and I'm confident that we can learn the lessons and deliver a really successful Sizewell power station, hopefully by the mid 2030s.
Do you think we should be thinking even beyond Sizewell as what's next? I think the previous government, I don't know if there was ever any actual like figures attached to it or any way to pay for it, but I think there was a sort of rhetorical commitment to a sort of pipeline of nuclear power stations being
Yes,
developed.
that's very
And this government hasn't followed up and said they'll
well,
do that
look,
as well.
there's 2
Mm,
points to make on that. First of all, the last government did publish a roadmap, but there was no money behind it. Okay,
mm.
so we really had to start again. My former boss, Ed Miliband, is very committed to the nuclear program, but our immediate focus was to get final investment decision for Sizewell C. And also, we haven't talked about small modular reactors because also a big announcement was made a few weeks ago that we're funding Rolls-Royce to develop a fleet of small modular reactors in the UK as well. My understanding, and obviously, look, I'm no longer a minister there, is that over the next 6 months, the department, having got these two major projects over the line, are now going to work on, look, what should our future appetite be in relation to new nuclear? How much do we need? What should be the timescale? And I think, within the next year, we'll be pretty certain where we're going. They're also looking at ways in which the private sector can be encouraged to invest more because clearly the public finances are very tight. And so, there's no golden pot that ministers could go to and say, can you help us develop more nuclear power stations? So we are, I think, inevitably going to have to look to the private sector for investment.
Do you think nuclear is always going to be something that's going to need the government to be there, either co-financing or de-risking? Is it something inherent in nuclear technology being complicated and difficult, or could we ever have a world where nuclear seems like a good bet for just the private sector to fund on its own?
I do hope the private sector can come in big time in the future. Government, I think, is always going to be needed as a backstop and to give confidence to private sector investors that it's going to work out for them. So although government may not be finding the big numbers that you read about in relation to Sizewell, government is always going to be involved. And that's the same globally because we are seeing a nuclear renaissance in new nuclear. The International Energy Authority published a report early this year pointing out that I think it's in up to 40 countries, new nuclear plants are being planned or built. So this is happening globally. There's no doubt that there is a lot of interest by private investors, but they do seem to need the governments to come in to reassure them and to be part of the development.
And something we talk about a lot is how long it takes to build things. Every time me and Martin talk about something being built, it's always like, and when's it going to open? And it's going to be the mid 2030s. And we try and think about how old we'll be when that happens. So Hinkley is obviously taking a while. Sizewell will be in the 2030s when that opens. Do you think there's anything that can be done to actually speed up nuclear development? Again, is it sort of inherent in building a project of that complexity, or are there sort of areas where we can open nuclear plants and especially these SMRs and get them done a lot faster?
It's a great question. And clearly, when you build a nuclear reactor, you have to be very careful. You have to design in safety to the nth degree. So I think people can understand that it's not something you can build overnight. You've got to go through a regulatory process as well. And they are complex and they're mega. Even the small modular reactors, they're not small in the terms that you and I think of small. They're still huge structures. I am optimistic though. The whole point about modular, the name's on the tin. In other words, factory production, where you're getting more and more experience, your timelines are reduced, your productivity gains. If we're going to see fleets of small modular reactors opened and built all over the world, then I think we can speed up the whole process. Because I agree, Here am I talking in 2025 about fantastic news, final investment decision for Sizewell C has been given. And then I'm saying, well, 2035, 10 years. And yeah, it's a long time ahead. But one thing I think I've learned as a minister, and this country needs to learn, is sometimes you have to lay foundations for the future. The modern world is instant, isn't it? People want instant solutions. We know that. Look,
Hmm.
we're all impatient ourselves as individuals, so we're all part of this. But some things you need to look at the future, just as in healthcare, you need to look at how many older people need caring over the next 30 years. It's the same with electricity. We need a massive increase in electricity. It's part of the way we're going to get rid of carbon from the atmosphere. Nuclear is a wonderful, safe, secure way to provide it. It also
Hmm.
provides what's called base load. We're going big on wind, offshore, onshore, and solar. Great, green energy. But there are times when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and you have dips in your electricity generation. Nuclear is totally reliable. And so you've got that as we call base load. The aim is to use gas as an interim because gas power stations can be switched on and off very, very quickly.
Hmm.
So you think of nuclear as your base. You've got that foundation. Then think of wind and solar as providing most of the electricity generation, with gas as a kind of reserve coming in when necessary, but hopefully not too often. That's the way I
Hmm.
see it. And we're going to need a lot more generation of electricity in the future. Electric vehicles, houses heated one way or another through electricity, businesses, industrial processes, and we are going to need a grid. And this is not always easy too, because pylons, no one loves pylons, do they? But we are going to need more pylons because we have to transport our electricity all over the country.
Whenever we're driving, I say to my partner, "Look at those pylons. That's a beautiful sign of Britain's industrial progress." And I don't think she's entirely convinced.
I don't know. You can make a reasonable punt at wind farms. You can claim, can't you, that there was an elegance about them. Grid is very difficult, and of course, what the government's recognised this, and they really have announced plans to give incentive payments to people who live
Hmm.
near pylons in the future, perhaps something off their bill as a way of recognising that they're basically having pylons for the greater good.
So I agree with you on the sort of importance of nuclear and base load and so on. With SMRs particularly, the small modular reactors, like you say, that these are sort of things that are designed, I guess, on a production line, so they're easier and cheaper to build. As I understand it, the government is only committing to the one that's been announced by the end of the Parliament. I guess my stupid question might be, why not 10? Why are we stopping at one when the sort of utility of an SMR is in quantity in terms of like we can copy and paste the same thing over and over and make them in the same factory. So can we not make more of them?
Yes, and don't forget Rolls-Royce already has a contract with Czechia to provide small modular reactors, and I think Rolls-Royce have got a great opportunity to sell SMRs both in this country but also globally, which is
Hmm.
fantastic, fantastic company. And of course, they're very, very well experienced in nuclear reactors, particularly in defence. So I agree. I would love to see more small modular reactors developed in the UK. There is the issue of public finance. And what I'd like to see over the next year or two is the government continuing to engage with private developers who wish to develop SMRs. I also think we can look at the US, where some of the social media, the mega corporations on the West Coast, are themselves investing in small modular reactors because their data centers use so much electricity. They see this as a great way to have certainty of electricity and low carbon. And for all President Trump's comments on net zero, etc., within the US, there are lots of people who wish to see low carbon energy developed.
So something which I think is talked about a lot with nuclear is regulatory issues. Are there any sort of low-hanging fruit that you think in terms of regulatory things that could be done to sort of reduce
Yeah,
the cost of nuclear
the
or
Prime
speed things
Minister
up?
is very keen, and the Chancellor are very keen to see us look at nuclear regulation to see, are we going over the top? Are there ways in which we can streamline it? And we set up a task force which is going to report very soon, I think early autumn. So I'm hoping they'll come through with some ideas about how obviously safety has to be your number one issue. Of course, It does. But do we duplicate some of the processes? And also, if a design has been approved in the US, do we really need to go through really extensive processes to say it's okay for the UK? In medicines regulation, there is mutual recognition between countries. And I think we could do much more of that as well. We've got a new boss of the nuclear regulator, the Office of Nuclear Regulation, who'll be also, I think, looking at this to see whether we can have more agile regulation, if you like.
So, in terms of something like South Korea, for instance, I understand they're very good at making nuclear
Yeah,
reactors and
they
so on.
are. Yeah.
Can you imagine Britain
Yeah.
passing a law or something or a change in the regulations that say, well, if South Korea have approved it, that's good enough for us, and then
I
we're
think
on easy streets.
I'm not sure. I think what you could certainly say is if a design has been used in another country where we have great confidence in their regulatory system, then I think you can shortcut some of the approvals you need in this country and vice versa. I mean, obviously, you look at other countries and some of them have been very successful. Often it's a bit like high speed rail, isn't it? And you look at Spain, well, they've developed a great network in recent years. If you look at the map, Spain's very, very large compared to the UK with a less population. Part of our issues is we're a small nation in area with a larger population compared to many European countries, and a lot of people do not like developments going near them. I'm not here to defend HS2, by the way, uh, but you can see some of the problems. You know, the cost of going through the Chilterns, for instance, or the
Mm.
protests in Buckinghamshire obviously led to delays and costs. It's the same with developments generally in our country. We have got to get over it. We've got a planning and infrastructure bill in the Lords at the moment, which is designed to speed up planning and to try and get approvals through so that we can start to build many more houses and energy infrastructure and some of the other things we need to modernize this country. And it's a tricky balance, isn't there, between speeding on, making sure you've got good regulation, but it's not cutting corners, taking people with you, but recognizing that sometimes, you've got to do these things.
Do you think the government should be more bullish in picking a fight almost? On our show, I'm like the last HS2 Ultra in the jungle defending it, I think, at this point. I still think it should go to Manchester.
Listen, just on that, I live in Birmingham. I'm from Birmingham, and you should see the first of all, the new big station is being built right in the city centre now. Second, the number of cranes and new developments taking place on the back of that HS2 investment. Whatever, I know it's been a nightmare, hasn't it? And the costs. But
Mm.
the outcome in the long term, I think, will be positive. And I totally agree with you about Manchester. It's ridiculous that we've ended up in this situation. I think what will
Mm.
happen is they will open HS2. It will be very successful. And then the pressure will really be on to take it to not just Manchester, but also Leeds, of course, because it was going to go to Manchester and Leeds.
So very finally, so our show, it's called The Abundance Agenda. We're big on abundance. Like I say, we want trains, we want
Yeah.
energy, we want to build things. But part of the vision, I guess, of what we try to promote on our show is the idea of energy abundance. So not just replacing the amount of energy being generated by fossil fuels, but we would like a world with, way more energy than we could ever need because we can use the excess energy to, decarbonize the atmosphere or desalinate the sea or fuel AI data centers and so on. Do you think, I ask every guest this at the end because I'm trying to sell this to the politicians, but do you think this could ever be a politically saleable idea, or does this just sound a bit
Listen,
too
it's
pie in
got
the
to be.
sky?
Listen, it's got to be. We look, you know, we're facing really critical problems at the moment. The only way through this is growth, and energy abundance, as you put it, is got to be part of that. And I was just thinking as you were talking,
Mm.
I think it's going to be a great success story. Carbon capture, usage and
Mm.
storage. So the UK, this government, we've committed over £20 billion to developing the carbon capture technology. So where you have industrial processes which are very carbon intensive, the aim is to capture the carbon, put it into pipes, send it to the North Sea, put it into the very rocks where oil and gas was taken out and plug it. And we've got a huge resource there, British technology, and we can actually let other countries use the North Sea in that way as well. decarbonising society as well. And that is a great model of what we can do. And I believe that it's not just the politicians, it's the public. We have to get and take the public with us, because this is the only way, look, we're going to get through the issues that we've been talking about. So, so difficult issues, welfare costs, cost of pensions, the health service, number of older people who need care. We ain't going to be able to do what we really want to do unless we can grow the economy.
Lord Hunt of Kings Heath, thank you very much. So, Martin, that's just about it for this week's show. How do you think it's gone?
It's great, James. We're 21 episodes in. That means we're legally able to drink in most US states now. And apparently we've got 21 more episodes to fill before the end of the year. So if anyone's got any ideas, suggestions, don't forget to go to abundancepod.com and subscribe there as well, because you can never be subscribed in too many places, and leave a comment. And if it's a good comment, we might consider it for the show. And if it's a bad comment, we might also consider it for the show, but for very different reasons.
So lots of calls to action there. Also, read our Substacks, links on abundancepod.com. But for now, thanks for listening.
See you next week.